I'm going to be a little bit different than everyone else in the sense that I am not going to talk about how much money you can make by going through an ICO. Actually, I need a remote. Hold on a sec. This must be it. The second thing that I'm going to do is I'm not going to be talking about, even though I'm going to reference it, the value of Bitcoin. But I do want to say that since I was invited to come here, the value of Bitcoin has gone up over 30%. So what I'm going to encourage you to always do is to invite me to come back to your beautiful city, because it will actually improve and make everyone a lot of money. But what I'm going to talk about is the coming mega wave for blockchain talent. This is something that is not even discussed in most corporate environments. It's never discussed in most conferences, but it's going to be more impactful than anything that you're thinking of from the ICO basis. This is a tsunami wave that is approaching us. It's so large simply because there is such a huge pent-up demand for blockchain. Blockchain is actually very unique in the sense that it's one of the very first technologies that has not benefited the early adopters. It has not benefited the startups. Who it's going to benefit the most, in the most grand way, is going to be the old line companies, the large industrial complexes, the established sectors. And of course, we always talk about the financial sector simply because it is the lowest hanging fruit. They're going to be the sector that will actually probably make the most money because it's the simplest and easiest. So the question is then why are we talking about blockchain? I actually spoke at the conference in late August as a guest, and I'm here again. And the difference in terms of the number of people who are interested in blockchain and cryptocurrencies has grown exponentially. Every conference that I've gone to this year has been exactly the same thing. The ones that at the beginning of the year, there were hundreds or maybe 1,000. The ones that we're having now was thousands to tens of thousands. This here is just a simple chart in terms of Google requests to understand what Bitcoin and blockchain is. This isn't for Bitcoin, this is actually for blockchain. And if you'll look at it, it's very similar to the value path that we've seen with Bitcoin. But here's another aspect of it, and that is to understand where blockchain fits into all of it. So a year ago, everything was the Internet of Things. Everyone wanted to put a sensor on your toaster or your refrigerator or your car to try to figure out how could we actually manage this. Then everything became fintech. Everything was fintech. And blockchain was actually a very minor part of it. What we're seeing now is that blockchain is now actually outpolling, both in terms of money, resources, and attention, what is going on in terms of what people are trying to create. So why are the best minds working on blockchain? That's a bigger question than what we've ever thought before. In the past, when people have adopted a new technology and they've started to actually deploy it, what they have found is that it drew the best minds. But what we're seeing now is we're seeing an even larger amount of attention given to this new technology. And why I call it a technology is because it's the foundational aspect. We have killer apps already for blockchain. The killer apps are cryptocurrencies. The first killer app was, of course, Bitcoin. But it is built on this technology of cryptography, distributed ledgers, as well as proof of work aspects in terms of consensus, in terms of establishing things. So while this is important, we're seeing now adoption. The adoption by mainstream companies adopting the acceptance of cryptocurrencies. And this is just a sample example of companies that are primarily US-based, except for the Polish airlines, who actually accept cryptocurrencies as part of their marketing, as part of their business model. Overstock is probably one of the very first ones because they were the very largest multi-billion-dollar company to to accept cryptocurrencies initially. But everything else, you can buy on Virgin Galactic, you can buy your trip to space on cryptocurrencies. Tesla, you can buy your cars or even your new long-haul trucks with cryptocurrencies. Amazon accepts cryptocurrencies. Everything that you could possibly want. You can even find love with OkCupid by paying for it with cryptocurrencies. But that's not the important thing is. So what we're going to do here is we're going to look at what these cryptocurrencies and token and coin offerings have done in terms of who they're funding. The very first thing that we're going to try to look at is in 2004 when we actually had Ethereum launch, and they raised a massive $18 million. By today's standard, it's insignificant. By 2015, of course, we had some smaller ones, but a larger number of people. $14 million was raised that year. And in 2016, of course, we had the Dow that actually raised a huge amount, $160 million, and of course, they immediately turned around and collapsed due to other things. But the idea is that these are companies who are not just making a cryptocurrency. They're actually trying to make a product, and that product is really built on the technology of blockchain. So if we kind of look at it in another way, is where have all these ICOs actually funded? What kind of industries have they funded? Of course, Tezos is the top money earner this year. They have built a platform that may never ever be launched, but they raised $208 million. Actually, I shouldn't say Tezos is the largest, because actually Filecoin blew them away with $256 million that they raised. But what you're seeing here is you're seeing that companies in the media and social space, gaming and gambling, Internet of Things and People, finance markets, are all building products built on blockchain. You have financial investments and, of course, banking and payments. You have cloud solutions that are being built on this. And, of course, you have cryptocurrency. But when you start to look at it even a little bit further in terms of by general categories, this is an important thing to start to see, is that infrastructure, the ability to build out blockchain has raised 34% of the ICO money. Trading and investment 13%, and finance 10%, and payments 7%. But data storage, the ability to actually store your data on the blockchain in a distributed cryptography-based environment has been proven to be a product killer. And again, these aren't necessarily products that are based on coins, but what you're seeing is that the funding that they've received has allowed for these companies to build products that are impacting mainstream businesses. And of course, you have everything else. You have gambling and commerce, identity, reputation. And I would say this about identity and reputation. Identity management and digital identities is probably going to be the killer application, because everything else will follow based on the digital identities. So why does it matter for businesses? It matters for businesses because they can save a lot of money. Businesses like the financial sector, Santander Bank has actually estimated that the financial sector will save $20 billion a year in savings by adopting blockchain. Currently, every multinational bank is supporting about 40,000 legacy systems. The replacement of those legacy systems, the ability to have shared data with all the others in the financial sector, will eliminate probably close to 45 to 50% of all middle and back office jobs. Those jobs are just going to go away simply because of the adoption of technology. But you're also seeing everything else. You're seeing the cost of tax return fraud as an example. It will eliminate $21 billion there. For food illnesses, we're going to talk about that in a second. The elimination of contaminated food from the value chain and the supply chain will actually impact a lot of people's lives. And instead of it taking months to figure out which mango grove this mango came from for food contamination, it'll take about 2 seconds to actually look that up. Now, here's a bigger question. So what companies are adopting blockchain? Now, these are companies that are not issuing tokens, but they're actually adopting blockchain. Of course, you have a lot of cloud solutions out there. You have the Microsofts, you have the Amazons, you have the IBMs, you have the Oracles. You'll even start to see Apple coming out with their own blockchain solutions. You're seeing in the financial sector a great adoption of blockchain, and simply the savings are so great that they cannot afford to not do this. So you have Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs and Bank of America and HSBC, just as a few of the major global banks that are adopting blockchain for not only internal management, but also for pricing and settlement. Walmart, this is the food chain item here. So Walmart and Whole Foods are adopting blockchain in such huge ways that what you're starting to see is that their adoption of blockchain is exceeding what they actually paid for originally with RFID chips. That acceptance of this new technology has proven to be very important for them. But you also then have Airbus. I'm going to talk about Airbus in a second. Airbus, the average plane that Airbus makes has about 1 million parts. What Airbus is doing is they are moving all of their entire supply chain completely and totally over to blockchain, simply because of the great amount of savings that it will have. Overstock, so their entire inventory now is being managed by blockchain. You have now financial firms like Mint, which is actually kind of like a robo-advisor, and they are using blockchain. And you also have now government departments that are using it. So you have the Department of Defense that is using it. You have DARPA that is using it. You're going to see like the Patent and Trademark Offices adopt blockchain simply because it will speed up everything that governments do. So by product and service categories, so this here is an important thing to do. When you start to think about what kind of industries are going to be impacted by this, of course what you're seeing is and this is a categorization that has been compiled by a company called Blockchain Angels, and this was from September 2017. So the very first thing is you're going to have, again, infrastructure. Huge amounts of investments are being built in for infrastructure. You have, of course, trading and investing. You have financial services. You have payments, very, very simple things to do. But you also have things like utilities and water and energy that is actually being done. You actually see a huge amount of emphasis on blockchain consulting. What you're starting to see, though, is a pattern here, is that major industries are adopting blockchain as a technology. Again, by product sector, what you're starting to see is huge adoptions. And it's covering everything. It's covering things like advertising and trade. It's covering data analytics. It's covering, of course, energy and utilities. In the UK, they're actually putting the local utilities on a blockchain, and what they're using is the smart contracts to pay for it. So instead of billing out, the utilities billing out to the consumers a monthly bill, they're actually paying it with cryptocurrencies, a nominal one, not without any volatility, but they're paying it back with smart contracts. So it's created a new cash flow that has never existed for that industry. But you're also seeing things like supply chains. You're seeing social communications all being impacted by blockchain. So in terms of the geographic breakdown, now this is not necessarily a good sign for the Russian environment, but where is most of the current technology being deployed? Of course, you're seeing that in the United States, and the second largest area is the United Kingdom. I would say that New York and London basically rule in terms of where most blockchain development is being done. But you also then have China, and you have Canada, and you have Germany coming in at the number 5 spot. The adoption of blockchain is a global phenomena. So why are we looking at blockchain then as a technology? Well, it's because it works in every way that we possibly engage with our environments. It works in fintech and insurance. Insurance is going to be dramatically impacted through the use of smart contracts. law tech is going to be dramatically impacted by this. It's estimated that the number of lawyers that already exceeds the amount that we need will probably be reduced by another 30% simply because of the use of blockchain. You have RegTech, of course, which is going to probably govern all of this. But in industry, you're seeing supply chain and production and design, as well as market-to-market commerce. You're going to see robotics that are all going to be built on blockchain. Smart cities, all governments are going to be moving over to the blockchain. And of course, one of the biggest, most personal aspects is going to be the health area. So pharma and diagnostics and medical care are all going to be impacted by blockchain. So this gets us to the crux of this entire presentation, and that is, how many blockchain developers are there globally? As of about 3 months ago, it was estimated that the number of full-time blockchain developers in the world right now is about 5,000. It's estimated that about 20,000 people have dabbled in it, but it is not their primary business. So when you say to yourself, what is the attention span of this and what are we going to be doing? There's more people who actually attend conferences, blockchain conferences, than there are developers. Airbus, I mentioned them a little bit earlier, they estimate that they need 15,000 blockchain developers, or 3 times the global number of available blockchain developers, to actually do their implementation of the blockchain. When you start to look at the next segment, this is the financial sector. The number of blockchain developers needed for the financial sector is estimated at 250,000. And just keep reminding yourself, there's only 5,000 currently available. That's 50 times the amount of available people that is going to be needed just by the financial sector. When we start to look at more broad markets, we're looking at the supply chain. The number of blockchain developers that will be needed for the supply chain is 2.5 million. Now we're talking 500 times the number of blockchain developers that currently exist. And then the moment that you throw in government, you're looking at something that is 2,000% larger. We're going to be needing roughly 10 million full-time blockchain developers to actually manage the implementation of what we have. Now, there's a lot of excitement currently about blockchain, and most of it is in the crypto market. And what we're seeing is that 5,000 number is probably only half that. It's not really 5,000. It's really probably only 2,500, because the other 2,500 developers are working on cryptography for the cryptocurrency markets. What this leads us to be, though, is that we're finding ourselves in a situation where there's a dearth of available developers. And these developers are actually going to be in such high demand. When we think of the internet 20 years ago or 25 years ago, if you could do HTML programming, you were overpaid in comparison to your peers. 10 years ago, when the iPhone was first launched, the original app developers were overpaid for what they were capable of doing simply because there were so few of them. We're now seeing a situation where blockchain developers, we're going to have 20 years of a limited number of blockchain developers, which means that there'll be a huge competition for their attention. All of these mainstream companies and industries are going to be desperate to hire blockchain developers. And what we're looking at here is that blockchain adoption cycle. Everyone likes to use the Gardner loop, but I like this one a little bit better. It's actually by Accenture, and that is we're really in the early adoption phase. We're looking at a growth phase over the next probably 6 years, beyond that, and of course in maturity at 2025. Most governments, I've interviewed a number of congressmen, I've interviewed the chief technology officer from the Library of Congress in the US. The US government as a whole is not going to be adopting blockchain solutions in mass for probably 15 years. But that's a good thing for us simply because we don't have enough blockchain developers to do that. The blockchain developers who are coming up and are available now are going to be paid a premium for their services simply because there's so few of them. So again, looking at blockchain as a technology and as for adoption, what we're seeing is that one of the biggest areas that blockchain is going to impact, of course, is the supply chain. It's going to impact customers, but the customers, fortunately, it'll be transparent to them. So when you start to do your banking and your banking all of a sudden just happens faster or slightly cheaper, you won't know that it was simply an adoption of blockchain that's actually made it. And of course, now technology providers are going to be offering solutions that are going to become new. We're going to find new ways to implement blockchain that we have never thought about. Value chains will actually be dynamically changed simply because of the adoption of blockchain and now this transparency of information that impacts it all. Regulators are actually going to find blockchain to be an important aspect simply because it'll allow for them to peer into industries in real time versus always looking back. The ability to see real time how a bank is doing, as an example, real time as to how a particular regulated industry is monitoring things, real time in terms of how pharmacies are using their research for drug development. And of course, industries are going to be impacted dramatically by this. This gets me to this point of the presentation where not every blockchain program is useful. Many are going to be useless. The thing that I actually repeat often, and I actually heard this from the director of ecosystems from the Hyperledger project at the Linux Foundation, and she actually says this. She goes, if you think blockchain is the solution to your problem, you don't understand your problems and you don't understand blockchain. Nevertheless, what we're going to see is that the need for people, that human capital, is going to be dramatically impacted by the implementation of this technology. So I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Bryant Nielson, and I'm the executive director and founder of the Blockchain Academy. And what we do is we actually train developers. So I think this is a point where we have questions.
Thank you, Brian.
Hi. Hello. I myself have a question.
Sure.
You mentioned in your presentation that the cryptocurrency is the first adoption or the first app to use the blockchain.
Correct.
What do you think is the next one?
The one that I think will be most impactful will be the supply chain. Supply chain is not going to be an app per se like we're familiar with on a consumer basis, but the implementation and application of blockchain in the supply chain will be dramatic, more dramatic than anything we're seeing. If you were to try to measure it, if you were to say that the impact of cryptocurrencies with the use of blockchain technology is about this big, the impact that is going to be on the supply chain will be about, from the floor to here, a huge multiple.
Yeah, that's for sure. And what is the estimated time of the full adoption? What do you think will happen? Is it going to be like 10 years, 50 years?
It's going to be actually a rolling adoption. So really what you're going to find is you're going to find that these proof of concepts that a lot of people have already developed have to come up to a point where there's going to be enterprise rollout. And what you're going to see is this situation of an inability to do that simply because there's insufficient number of developers. So it's going to be a slow, staggered, but even problematic adoption rate. But I would say that by 2025, so that's roughly 7 years-ish away, we're going to find ourselves with massive adoption of blockchain, and it'll impact every aspect of our life.
Great. And one more question. What do you think about the consensus? I mean, the proof of work and the development of the new, more sophisticated consensuses. What do you think will happen in the proof of work consensus case?
Well, I would say that first of all, blockchain technology is in its 1.0 iteration. There was a prior speaker who said that don't change blockchain, change the applications. The blockchain is actually a mature technology. It is mature in some ways in terms of the adoption of cryptography, in terms of managing it, but the blockchain of today is not going to be the blockchain we see of the future. So there's going to be a lot of changes. So full adoption will be, again, 7 years or so.
That's great. Давайте еще раз поблагодарим.